Hello there, you're watching Wilhelm Miniatures. In this episode, I'm going to paint the Vampire Queen by Anna of Gardens of Hecate, produced by Meridian Miniatures. I wanted the head to be tilting a little bit to the side, so I changed the pose a bit, leaving me with quite a gap back here. So I'm just filling it with a mix of green stuff and epoxy sculpt. Trying to mimic the layered fur texture with the knife tool. I added a little bit of green stuff and fur texture around the wings as well. Now, on to the painting. I primed this one with Zandri dust, as I wanted a warmer base coat than what I usually do, just to try something a little different. I'm dry brushing on a little Zandri dust and white to build up some highlights. I'll do this in a few layers and add gradually more white until I'm happy with the surface. I'm picking out the sharpest edges and details with pure white. Here I'm using Mortarion Grime as the first layer of shadows, and I'm applying this all over the miniature. I like this shade quite a lot because it's very transparent compared to the other ones. It's great for gradually building up shadows and also for blending colors together like this, where we have the sharp white highlights and the Zandri dust in between. It's good to have this to kind of bind everything together. I'm also removing some shade from the very brightest tops, just wiping away with my finger. I want some more contrast, so I'm adding more white to the sharper details. And as you can see, the shade isn't dry at all. I just applied it, but it's usually fine painting on top of a newly washed or shaded surface, as long as you hit the tops, the most dry parts, and be a bit careful to not have any paint run into the recesses. Trying to bring some life to this character by adding some red details. Especially want some around the hands and the face. The mouth is important to get. Maybe the ears too should get some. A cold blue-green shade is a good contrast to the red, so I'm adding that to the undersides and in the deepest shadows. Here I'm stippling on some of the same blue-green shade that I used in the shadows on the wings to make an interesting pattern. I want the fur to be colder and darker and more grey, so I'm applying Nuln Oil over the fur parts. Also maybe stippling it a bit in the transitions, not to make it too sharp. I decided to have a transition along the arms, to have them darker at the hands, and more grey and lifeless. So I'm using Nuln Oil for that as well. And I want the wings darker too, so I'm adding Nuln Oil all over them as well. And back to some white. I like going back and forth between sharp highlights and dark shadows to really bring out the contrasts. I don't decide how many layers or how many times I'm going to repeat this process. I just do it until I think it looks good. And I also don't highlight the entire miniature. I try to focus on the details that I think are most important, and the ones that are pointing towards the light source. I'm adding some black contrast paint to the fur to make it a bit darker and have more contrast to the rest of the body. I also really like these layers of fur, so I'm trying to make them stand a bit more apart and pop a bit more by adding black in between the layers. Alright, let's make a mess. I forgot to texture this guy before priming, so I'm texturing now during the painting stage instead, which is why I am adding just some brown acrylic paint into my texture to make it easier to paint when it's dry. This is just a thick texture paste that I'm making of dirt and glue. PVA glue or Mod Podge. The base took a little while to dry, but now that it's completely dried, I'm brushing on some green on the very tips and highlights of the rocks and sand particles to make the texture pop. I left it like this overnight, and I think it's more or less done, but the only thing that I think is missing is to have the tongue a little bit redder than the rest of the body. So I'm using some of the old glaze paint for this. Not sure if these still exist, but a red shade or contrast paint would work too. It's just nice to have one that's much brighter than the red I've used around the body. And there we have it, the finished Vampire Queen. I'll probably use this one as an encounter in a role-playing scenario in the future, so if any of you know of any cool 5e stats for a vampire beast, I would very much appreciate if you share it, or have any other ideas of how to use this beast.